So yes, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn, hosted by MnDOT's African American Employee Resource Group. My name is Kim Collins, and I am one of MnDOT's deputy commissioners. And our commissioner, Nancy Daubenberger, was called to a cabinet meeting this morning. So we hope that she will be available to join us shortly. And as a result of her being called away, it is my pleasure to be available to participate in today's event. And I will be co-facilitating along with Gloria Jeff, who is a member of the AAERG. So with that, I'll pause. And Gloria Jeff, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Jeff, the Director of Livability for the Metro District and an active member of the African American Employee Resource Group. I'm excited to have all of you join us today. For some of you who were on earlier, you heard the dialogue. I'm excited to have my friend, my colleague, the Executive Director of the Federal Highway Administration, Gloria Shepherd, and members of her team with us today. Before we get into Gloria's remarks, let me take a couple minutes to do the required paid announcement that says, as part of its business activities related to Employee Resource Group events, MnDOT's African American Employee Resource Group will record this presentation for viewing by any party interested in this event, with access to MnDOT's internal and external websites and YouTube. If you have enabled your camera during the session, the recording may include your image, which is private data under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. You are not required to allow MnDOT to use your image, and there are no consequences for declining to do so. To opt out of the recording, simply turn off your camera. The recording will be accessible to anyone with access to MnDOT's internal and external websites and YouTube as well, or anyone authorized by law. We will be muting everyone on the call who is not presenting, so feel free to ask any questions by using the chat. And with that, we will introduce our presenter today. And again, please utilize the chat. We have a couple of members of the AAERG monitoring the chat, and we will hold questions until we've completed preliminary questions with Director Shepherd. And with that, Kim, I'm going to turn it back over to you to introduce Gloria Shepherd.
Thank you, Gloria. Well, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Shepherd. Dr. Shepherd is responsible for guiding FHWA as it administers more than $350 billion as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. She oversees and leads the agency in advancing national transportation initiatives to accelerate project delivery, promote environmental justice and stewardship, and to reduce transportation's carbon footprint on the national highway system. She served for 8 years as the director of the Office of Planning, where she was the principal advocate for metropolitan and statewide planning and programs. And with that, Gloria, I think I turn it back over to you.
Yep. This is an opportunity for us to, during Women's History Month, as well as part of the celebration of Black history, to have a conversation with an African-American female identified leader within the transportation industry. Gloria, we just got we've got a few questions for you. You've seen them as an opportunity, just kind of get to know you and then get a sense of your responsibilities. And let's start with the question that comes up, I'm sure not as frequently as it would have a decade or two ago, but as the first African-American to lead the Federal Highway Administration as executive director, what sort of unique perspectives do you think that you bring to this role?
Thank you, Gloria. And Dawn, please call me Gloria, not doctor. I don't usually allow people to call me doctor. And I want to acknowledge Gloria's role in getting me into FHWA. She was crucial, essential in getting me into the agency, an agency at that time that really pretty much hired and promoted from inside. So I want to acknowledge you, Gloria. Thank you. Yeah, I'm the first woman and the first African American woman to be executive director. And I think that the perspective I bring is I see the agency as one where you need to understand the culture of FHWA, and I think it's a diverse culture because we have a diverse workforce. I think that I understand that it's not easy as a woman and as an African American woman um, to go up the ladder, a career ladder necessarily without a lot of hard work, and maybe even harder work than maybe some of your colleagues had to put in. I um, I was director of human environment before the director of planning, and then director of planning, and then the associate administrator for HEP, planning, environment, and real estate. So you can see the progression. And during that progression, I had to learn a lot of different parts of the agency. So my perspective is that, you have to work hard and perhaps harder than your colleagues, and you have to be perseverant. And you can't, you got to be persistent and you got to persevere, because you may not get certain jobs during the first time that you apply for them, but that doesn't mean that you're not qualified. You have to go back and maybe look at your qualification. And if you are qualified, it just may be the timing is not right for a specific position. So I encourage women to get to know all they can about not only their jobs, but the entire agency perspective, and also to persevere and not give up because you don't get a promotion initially.
Thanks, Gloria. Let's try another one. Again, let's see how good the crystal ball is. And you know how planners love to look into the crystal ball to figure out what's going to happen in the future. Over the next 3 to 5 years, what are the most likely opportunities and risk for transportation practitioners?
I think the opportunity to work with states for federal highways, and for the states to work with their locals and federal highway on some top issues, critical issues that we're facing today. First of all, safety. We know the numbers as far as fatalities have increased over the last several years, and part of it, I think, was during COVID. I'm talking to a number of state CEOs, because fewer people were driving. Those who were thought it was okay to go faster, and that wasn't all right at that time, and it's not all right now. And so we're realizing an astronomical increase in fatalities. So I think that the transportation practitioners, and like planning, like Gloria said, need to be innovative and work with other parts of the organization to see what is our role, the federal highway role, and the state highway roles, and the state transit roles, or any mode of transportation, and decreasing the number of fatalities. I think that the other opportunities are for transportation professionals to reach out and be multimodal. I think all too often, because we are, federal highways, or you're in state system and you focus on highways, we missed opportunities to connect with transit and rail and other modes of transportation. I think another aspect of transportation professionals, they should be engaging with other disciplines. So you're talking about transportation, but there's other things that affect transportation, like innovation, technology. I think that we, as professionals, have to become more proficient in those areas. and understand that the things we did in the ways we did it in the past will not be the way we do it in the future. And so we need to take the opportunities, as Gloria said, look in the crystal ball and see how can we do things differently. I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that we would be inspecting bridges with drones? Who would have thought that that we would be using our iPhones or cell phones or whatever in the cars as we're driving? Who would have thought that we would be in a position where we have to help the states and we have to help ourselves with our workforce because of the declining workforces that we realize because of the retirement age, and also because the younger professionals are going to other areas, other disciplines, or to because they can make more money. So I think all those things that we have to look at as transportation professionals and try to forecast what's going to happen and try to be innovative. Because if we're not innovative, then we're not useful. And that goes for the states and federal highway. We're in the same situation. We have to think about technology for ways we can do things differently, and innovations that would help us. And FHWA, we have everyday counts. And I think a lot of you are know about everyday counts. We're actually on our 7th edition of everyday counts. So we're on EDC 7. And what EDC does, it allows us to share proven activities, proven technology. So it's not like we're experimenting. It's already been experimented with, and it's proven. So getting to people that way, getting the states to interact with us on EDC, for us to interact with the states on innovation, I think is important because, the federal government is not the fountain of all wisdom. We have to make sure that our technology, our information, our policies, whatever we do is what I like to say, ground truth. It has to be workable in the real world because we can do all the innovations and policies up in headquarters that we want. If it doesn't work in the real world, then it was all for naught.
Kim, I think you will grab the next question. And you're on mute.
So I apologize, Gloria, in my effort to be a good substitution for the commissioner. I don't have the next question, so
Okay, I'll grab it.
Perhaps you can help me out.
I can grab it. Gloria, you spent a chunk of your career at the New York State DOT and at Maryland DOT. In working with those two states, how do you think that has helped you lead innovation at the federal level within federal highway, understanding the day-to-day kind of activity that state DOTs have to engage in?
Yeah, I consider my experience from New York State DOT and Maryland DOT, State Highway Administration, and then the department as essential to what we do now. Because like I said in my previous response, you have to ground truth things. You have to make sure they work in the real world. They work for the states, they work for the MPOs, and even sometimes they work for local governments. So I think ground truthing and understanding how to work with the federal government to get them to understand the reality of the state is important. I think that one of the things I definitely said when I worked for the states, the state Maryland particularly, I said to myself, if I ever went to the federal government, I was going to be more responsive than the federal government was at that time. Sometimes we had projects and we needed immediate information from FHWA, and the states don't have as much bureaucracy, so you might need that information for the governor within 24 hours. And so if some of the questions were based in federal statutory law, we didn't quite understand it. We had to go to FHWA. It wasn't helpful for them to get back to us in a week because, and by that time, the question was moot. And so one of the things that I try to do, and I impress on all my colleagues in FHWA, is we have to be responsive. Even if we say we don't know the answer and we'll get back to you, we need to say something because we got to let people know that they're not just talking to a computer, that they're talking to people and people need information and they need it at a specific time. So working in the States taught me when I came to the federal government to insist on that we be responsive. The other things is that working at the state level, you have more access to a lot of different groups. For example, the legislature, sometimes the governor, or other state departments, relevant state department CEOs, like Department of Natural Environment, like the Department of Economic Development. I'm talking at the state level. And so I think it's important for the federal government to understand that the states have to connect with other organizations within the state government in order to proceed on certain things. For example, with the environment, and you're talking about protected resources. A lot of times, the states would have to work with the SHPOs and get their responses for the SHPOs before they can get back to us. And so I think having the federal government understand that it takes the states have to coordinate too, and maybe coordinate even more than we do at the federal level. The other thing I think that I learned from the states that I brought to the federal government is that, states are different. They're not all the same, and they don't have the same culture, political culture, or population culture. They're different, and so they experience different things. So when I was in the States and we worked on different reauthorizations, we would form groups, but the groups were based on similar states. Like state of Maryland might be the size of Pennsylvania or New Jersey or something. So we joined together and we tried to promote our mutual interest. So I think it's important for the federal government to know that sometimes states are different, sometimes they're the same, but they do work together and they do talk to each other. I tell the folks up here that you got to look to the states to teach each other, because we learn well from each other, because we learn from each other's experience. And that's not something that maybe Federal Highway does or understand. So working at the state level, we got to understand mutual issues among states and try to develop mutual solutions among the states. And so I think that ground truthing with the states really helped me understand at the federal level the dynamics of working with the states, and that we can't just consider all states to be the same.
Kim, you've got the next question.
Thank you. So, Director Shepherd, from your perspective, what are the opportunities that you see for states to advance transportation equity?
I think under bill, there's a significant number of grant programs, as you know, and Wendell can tell you because they're getting ready to hit the divisions. Equity is part of all those grants, and some of them are specifically related to equity. I think that the states have the opportunity to work with their local governments, and we're promoting that, to work with their local governments to identify populations, underserved population, disadvantaged populations, understand their needs and understand how the grants relate to them as far as equity. I'll give you an example. Soon, we're going to have the corridors and community infrastructure grants. They're kind of part of the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure thing. And the community side of it, the corridor side, we think the states and larger entities will get it. And, of course, they understand the federal system. So, but the local side, I think it's important to look at people who are underserved communities to educate them on the value of electric vehicles. And not only that, but the resources that the federal government is bringing to bear to make EVs more affordable. And so I think that educating the locals, identifying the locals, getting them, mobilizing them to take advantage of some of these grants. We have a ton of planning grants that are going out. We have Safe Streets for All that's going out. We had Reconnecting Communities. We're about to have Neighborhood Access that's going out. All those programs have a significant equity element. And so the idea is for us, the states and the locals, to work together to ensure that the dollars are going to communities that need them most. So I think that equity is key. I mean, it's just absolutely key to us. Because when you think about other things like safety, is there equity in safety? I mean, is there equity as far as the enforcement agencies and how they conduct traffic stops and things like that? So I think that we need to look at those programs in advance. And I think we need to be context sensitive too. And some of those programs, the whole part of equity, like for example, Reconnecting Communities. I mean, that program is designed to reconnect communities that were historically divided by transportation. Now, does that mean that if there's a transportation facility in place now, like a bridge, we're going to tear it down and reconnect the communities? No, it doesn't mean that. But that doesn't mean we can't do something. There's the CAPS. I'm sure you're very familiar with CAPS. And there's in Alabama, they've taken taken a lot of opportunities to develop under the bridges actual recreational facilities that connect communities. So I think that we need to take advantage of these programs because this is the first time that we've had such an array of programs with such a significant focus on equity, with significant dollars to go to do it. So I hope that the states do take the opportunity to work with their low income and minority population, underserved, non-traditionally served, disadvantaged, whatever you term it, because this is the opportunity that in my career has never existed.
Another question in that your initial work within Federal Highway was focused on the human environment, and you talked a bit about it in your response to the last question. What do you think are the key elements of the human environment that the bipartisan infrastructure law will allow state DOTs and Federal Highway to look at as we look forward in our project work beyond the historic asset management based approach?
Right. I'll give you one example on this. Stephanie Pollock, who was our acting administrator, really, I think she puts a spotlight on this. When you think about project development, and you certainly know you're an expert at this, Gloria, and say you think about the NEPA process, for example. Okay, so if you affect wetlands, you have to get a permit from the Army Corps. If you affect historic historic elements, you have to get a concurrence from an advisory council on historic preservation. If you impact a special kind of bird or fowl, then you have to get, or fish population, then you have to get a permit from Fish and Wildlife Services. The point is that the natural environment has a lot of protections built into it. The human environment does not. So I think we have to think about the human environment and at the same level that we think about the natural environment. And the natural environment is pretty vigorous as far as the need to get the federal permitting applications done and actually get their concurrence. I think, and for the human environment, the impact on projects, like, are you displacing people? If you're impacting people's land and you're taking part of it, what does that do to the value of the land that's left behind? There's all kinds of impacts from the human environment, from the human environment perspective. And I think it's important for us to be more vigorous. We're trying to be here at FHWA more rigorous in our attempts to look at the human environment and displacements. So if somebody's displaced, can you give them a comparable or better housing? Can you keep them in the neighborhood or not? Some people, as you know, don't want to remain in their neighborhood because the neighborhood ain't that good to start with. So, they want to move out of the neighborhood, and we should be giving them the opportunity. But the only way you get that opportunity or understand their real impacts is by talking to them. So we have to actually talk to the communities before we start these projects, because the purpose and need in the NEPA process rarely says we want to make equity, we want to include equity and make people whole. What does it say? We want to relieve congestion. We want to improve safety, and those kind of things, but it doesn't talk to the people parts of it. So I think that there needs to be a comparable permitting or whatever, comparable focus on the human environment as we've given to the natural environment.
Great answer. I am going to give Kim an opportunity for another question, but while she is forming that, if folks, I'm shocked and amazed, I haven't seen any questions in the chat. I would hope that you folks have some questions. We have an extraordinary opportunity here to pose questions to the leading civil servant within all of Federal Highway. So let's take advantage of the opportunity. Kim?
I know that I'm straying off script slightly here, but I wanted to ask a question about multimodal transportation and just how vital it is to our communities, especially to underserved and underrepresented communities in this conversation around transportation equity. Can I just put that out there for you to respond to or react to?
Absolutely. Modal projects are critical. And one of the things that we've done among FHWA, FTA, and FRA is to develop our NEPA actions so we can use each other's NEPA actions. So if Transit's doing a project that has some land element to it, some highway element to it, they can choose to use highways NEPA system, NEPA process. And the other thing is, and I'm sure Gloria knows this, when we're doing project development, if there's an opportunity for another mode to be involved, then the mode becomes part of the project. They become a cooperating or participating agency. And so it gives the state or project sponsor an opportunity to look at another mode in addition to highways. When we're talking about relieving congestion, we think about highways mostly, but there's a transit element and there's a rail element to relieving congestion. And we also talk about the economy. Well, transit and rail enhances the economy. You know, a lot of freight hauled over rail, people over transit. So I think the opportunity to bring those other modes together and see what can be done in addition to the highway is an important aspect, and it's one that we're trying to promote.
Great. I am not seeing the question. So Jesse, I'm going to go to you. And I know that I've heard that based on the beeping on my phone, that there are a number of questions in there. And I saw Jason Splelak had his hand up. So we'll start with Jason, but after that, Jesse, can you identify the next series of questioners after Jason?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
You can move on. I just put my hand up to see if it was working. So
It's working.
It's working. Welcome, Commissioner Daubenberger. I see that you've joined us. We are just opening the floor to questions.
Good afternoon, and Executive Director Shepherd, thank you so much for doing this for us and having this conversation. And I just got back to my desk, but I actually have been listening over the last 10 minutes or so on my way back from the Capitol. So, but I will pipe down now and let Jesse go to other questions, but I do have some for you as well.
Okay, thank you.
Jesse, who's up next?
Yeah, we have a question from Jessica Owen. The question is, can you speak to the increased federal conversations and actions around the need for better collaboration between housing and transportation?
Yeah, that's something I referred to when I was talking about displacements. The Federal Highway Administration oversees the activities under the Uniform Act for 17 agencies, including HUD. We've worked with HUD on a number of projects. One that comes to mind immediately is I-526 in South Carolina. There were people displaced. We worked with HUD to understand what benefits they provided, in addition to what benefits we provide. Because often the populations that are being impacted do not have that information. And so if we want to maximize our resources, we have to work with other agencies to make sure that we're providing whatever help we can to impacted populations. Let me give you another example of things we do. You know, and HUD knows about this. If a person is displaced and they're in a market where their housing, we took at fair market value, and the housing in that area is significantly higher. We can increase the amount of dollars they get for housing. And that's important because, you know, everybody knows the market today. Everything is increased in price. So we try to find a way to make people hold or even leave them better off than they have been. I mean, I had 3 conversations with the officials from HUD when we're developing the Uniform Act to ensure that we addressed their concerns and our concerns too. And one of the things we did was, first of all, we got to learn a lot about each other. Like, I didn't know that a mobile home could mean on the ground or on wheels. And it really, and from HUD's perspective, it's important because it tells how much money, informs them of how much money they can provide for certain types of housing. So we are having a lot more conversations with HUD because unfortunately, a lot of projects in a lot of states are impacting people and leaving them in need of some housing.
Looks like I finally got the questions up in front of me. Judy Schmidt, you've had your hand up for a minute. Judy, if you're on, you're muted. Okay, it sounds like we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Judy. So,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. My hand was up earlier and I probably should have taken it down, but I just wanted to comment on how profound that statement was that you made earlier about we look at the environment and kind of really track all those things in the environment, but we don't do that in our behavioral world as well. So I just thought that was really profound and an important statement. Thank you.
And I want to stop and I want to acknowledge and recognize Wendell. Wendell is our person, our lieutenant on the ground, who represents you and tells us about you. And when you have problems, brings it to us if it's of that level. He has a director of field services who he goes to first, but he also he ensures that we know of any significant issues that you have. I mean, he's the person who helps ground truth your information with us. So I want to thank Wendell for his longtime service to FHWA.
Thank you, Gloria.
Okay. Commissioner Daubenberger, Gloria has a hard stop at 45 minutes after the hour. So I am going to give you an opportunity to get a couple of your questions in, and then we'll go back out to the attendees.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. Well, Director Shepherd, you know what?
Gloria, please call me Gloria.
Oh, thank you, Gloria. The question that Judy Schmidt, or the comment that Judy Schmidt just made, is actually the theme of my question too. And that had struck a chord with me, certainly, when you were talking about the NEPA process and how we assess impacts to the natural environment and also to the human environment. But then the natural environment impacts are what then dovetail into permitting processes. But the human environment impacts, we don't have that. And I think at the end, you made mention to, maybe that's what we need. Do you have any other thoughts on that you could share? Something that we as state DOT should be thinking about as, a way to think through that and other processes we should put in place. And in fact, as we are refining and about to get to a good point with MnDOT's strategic operating plan, we're talking about transportation equity and what measures we have. And there's some measures we've had in place for a long time, around contracting and workforce. But when it comes to impacting and balancing those burdens and benefits with our investments, how should we be thinking about that as processes moving forward? I'd love to hear any other thoughts you have on that, or be involved nationally in further discussions on that.
I'm sure I'm not going to say anything that's novel, but I'll tell you some things that we try to emphasize here. We emphasize a context-sensitive approach, context-sensitive solutions, context-sensitive design. And the reason why we do that is the one element that's really important, I think, and that is bringing in the population who might be impacted before the project starts, because you get to understand their concerns. And if you get to understand their concerns up front, it will help you at the back end, because you will obviously have put their concerns in the NEPA process in some way. And when you get down to public involvement and you get to the draft and you have a minimum of 45 days, you will already have their comments and you can anticipate what they will be saying during those 45 days. So I think, first of all, recognizing the impact. When I was back in Maryland in the day, we didn't have so much GIS and GPS. We laid out the maps. And on the maps, we could see an area that the project was probably going to go into. And we would look at the impacted populations in those areas. And to get them in the process early was important because, first of all, the people were not surprised that the project was going to come someplace within their jurisdiction, but they also got a chance to provide input on what they would like to see as part of the project. And so that was very helpful to us in developing projects. The other thing is that we really promoted, and based on the state's examples, virtual public involvement. And the reason why, when I was in associate administrator for planning and environmentality, we emphasized that, first of all, COVID was critical, but also just thinking about a lot of affected populations, especially people who are disadvantaged populations. They may not work a 9-to-5 job or an 8-to-4 job or 8-to-6 job, but they still have a right to provide input into your plans and your project delivery. So what we said was make it so that they had other forums for the populations to provide input. Make it so they could use their cell phones. Make it so that the virtual public involvement, the hearings or information was at different hours and maybe Sundays in different places. Virginia was very innovative during COVID. They set up trailers in the parking lots. And, people were standing at the appropriate distance because of the COVID regulations. And they were presenting project details to the people. But they found other ways, and a lot of other states have also had such innovations in those areas. And I think we need to do these extra things because, like you said, the permitting process would have asked questions about the impacts. What's the number of wetlands? How far does the bridge have to go if it's going over water? Coast Guard, and they have navigation impact analysis. So they're studying the impact, and if they don't agree with you, they'll say, no, you can't build a bridge that's 40, 40 feet. You have to do something that's 55. So they'll hold the project sponsor accountable in ways that people may not have the same strength or forceability as the permitting agencies. So I think it's in our best interest to become the permitting agencies in a way and establish a process where we're making sure that the impacted populations are being not only identified, but we hear what they say and we talk to them about how we can include what they say in the actual project.
Thank you so much, Gloria. We're close to your hard stop, and I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to thank a couple folks in our Office of Equity and Diversity for helping put on this event. Gina Cundin and Frida Alvarez were instrumental in making this happen. Commissioner Daubenberg, thank you for carving out time in your very busy schedule to be a part of that. Kim, thank you for jumping in there and making room. And Jesse and the rest of the folks in the back office, as I call it, where they make sure that I see all the questions that popped up. I do have a request on behalf of the Minnesota Department of Transportation, if I might, Commissioner Daubenberger, is one, to invite you at your earliest opportunity. Since spring officially began yesterday, we will have lovely weather for you in the great state of Minnesota.
Yeah, you'll have lovely weather for me in probably June.
No, but we'd like to invite you to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. I am going to be making some rounds in the divisions. Let me just express one more thing that I didn't touch on, and that's people succession planning. It's important to build our bench because there are so many people who are eligible at this point in their lives to retire. We have a number of different recruitment efforts going on, and they're to places where not only we expect to get people, but areas where we know we're having a hard time. So maybe universities that have a large minority community, and trying to let them know what FHWA is. I also did 2 rounds. I led it for FHWA and still leading it, the road to SES, the road to senior executive service. And the reason why is that we did a survey across the agency, and our workforce our leadership team is over 60% eligible, but our 15s are too. So then who do you have? I mean, so you got to start looking at the 13s and the 14s, the mid-grade, the lower grade, to build them up, make sure they're getting the experience, make sure they're getting the training, make sure they get everything they need to replace us, because time is of the essence at this point. The workforce is changing quickly, and I know the states are suffering. I mean, even when I was in Maryland, I mean, it was Neil Peterson, my boss then, told me it was like 65 to 35. 65 consultants, 35% FTEs, I mean, full-time staff. And that's a problem for the states, because you have to have somebody to oversee these projects. And so I think that it would benefit us all to think about succession planning. That's important. That's really important.
Very important point there that you underscored at the end, Gloria, and thank you. And again, thank you so much for your time that you carved out today to talk with us. And thanks to the AAERG for having the idea to reach out to you, but really appreciate the wonderful thoughts you shared with us, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
I look forward to seeing you in Minnesota.
Good.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
For all of you in attendance, thank you so much for being with us today. And when hopefully we'll work with Wendell and his crew, but hopefully when she's here in person, we'll have an opportunity to continue this conversation. Again, a special thank you to Gina and the rest of the crew in the Office of Equity and Diversity. And again, thank you, Commissioner Dobbenberger and Deputy Commissioner Collins. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and let's keep it going on a positive note here in MnDOT.
Thank you, Gloria Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Gloria.
Thanks, Gloria.